February 14th, 2025 felt ordinary on the surface. Cities were busy, restaurants were full, and people were focused on flowers, dinners, and small gestures of love. Nothing about the day suggested that something important was shifting underneath the global financial system. But while attention was elsewhere, a quiet sequence of events began, events that only make sense when viewed together. On that same day, 4 of South Korea's largest banks simultaneously stopped selling silver. There was no press conference, no warning, no gradual reduction in limits. Sales were simply suspended, indefinitely. These were not minor institutions struggling with supply. They were systemically important banks with global reach and deep liquidity. If they wanted silver, they could obtain it. The decision was not about availability. It was about permission. At nearly the same moment, China's banking regulators reclassified precious metals as high-risk assets. Overnight, ordinary citizens lost the ability to buy gold or silver through traditional banking channels. Accounts that had worked for years no longer could. No public debate followed. No emergency was declared. Access simply vanished. A few days later, in India, the pattern repeated in a different form. The government did not ban silver purchases. Instead, officials began making inquiries. Large transactions were questioned. Records were requested. Nothing dramatic happened, and that was precisely the point. This was not enforcement. It was reconnaissance, taken individually. These events looked disconnected. Together, they formed something familiar to anyone who studies financial history. This was coordination, not coincidence. And when governments coordinate quietly around a single asset, it is rarely because that asset is irrelevant. History shows a consistent pattern. When states feel threatened, they do not start with bans. They start with observation. They classify, monitor, and record. In the past, this happened with gold, with foreign currency, with capital itself. This time, the focus is silver.
The first step is always surveillance. New reporting rules appear. Transactions that were once routine now require additional documentation. Authorities speak the language of consumer protection, anti-money laundering, and fraud prevention. In the United States, expanded reporting requirements force dealers to collect detailed personal information on large purchases. In Europe, vague definitions of suspicious transactions give regulators broad discretion. Across major financial centers, the same tightening occurs within a remarkably short window. The result is simple: a detailed map of who owns what. Registries are never neutral. They exist to be used later. Once visibility is established, pressure follows. Banks quietly reclassify precious metals from stable investments to speculative assets. Services are discontinued without explanation. Fees rise. Minimum purchase amounts increase. Access becomes awkward, then uncomfortable, then socially suspect. No law has been broken, yet the message is clear. This is not something you are encouraged to own. At the same time, official warnings begin to circulate. Central banks publish notes about volatility. International institutions question the role of precious metals in modern portfolios. The tone is not urgent, but it is consistent. By the time restrictions become explicit, the narrative is already in place. When authorities later say they are protecting the public, many will believe them. The next phase introduces limits, not outright prohibitions, but caps, waiting periods, and bureaucratic friction. In China, citizens are pushed away from banks toward licensed dealers operating under strict quotas. In India, documentation requirements grow so complex that only the most persistent buyers continue. The limits are never uniform. Small purchases remain easy. Large ones attract attention. The goal is not to stop ownership entirely, but to prevent accumulation. This distinction matters. A citizen buying a few coins is not a threat. A citizen converting significant wealth into physical metal is making a statement about confidence in the monetary system. That is what triggers resistance. As these controls spread, attention shifts from buyers to the supply chain itself. Dealers depend on banks, payment processors, customs authorities, and licenses. Each of these points can be tightened without passing a single new law. Accounts are closed for risk reasons. Transactions are flagged or declined. Shipments are delayed. Export quotas appear in producing countries. Environmental reviews stretch timelines from months into years. Supply does not disappear overnight. It simply becomes unreliable. The result is a two-tier market. Strategic industries and approved buyers receive priority access. Retail buyers compete for what remains. Premiums rise. Inventory thins. Dealers struggle to operate, not because demand is weak, but because the system around them has become hostile. This is how access is removed without an announcement. The final stage rarely arrives without a crisis. A currency shock, a banking panic, a debt emergency. When it does, the legal framework is already in place. Emergency powers are invoked. Strategic assets are reclassified. Mandatory exchanges, price controls, or forced sales become possible. This has happened before. It worked in 1933 because ownership was visible and centralized. Modern governments remember that lesson. Quiet preparation is more effective than dramatic action. The timing explains everything. Silver now sits at the intersection of three pressures. Industrial demand is exploding as energy systems, technology infrastructure, and defense applications expand. Monetary systems are strained by debt, debasement, and declining trust. Supply is structurally constrained with few new mines and most production tied to other metals. These forces make silver simultaneously indispensable and politically sensitive. Allowing free accumulation risks a surge in price and a visible loss of confidence in currency. Restricting access preserves control. That is why the changes are subtle. That is why they are happening across jurisdictions, and that is why they are accelerating without headlines. The window does not close all at once. It narrows. Each month brings higher friction, fewer options, and longer delays. By the time the situation becomes obvious to everyone, the competition for remaining supply will be intense and expensive. This is not about panic. It is about recognizing patterns that have repeated for decades. When access to an asset is quietly restricted, it is rarely because that asset has no future. It is because someone understands its future very well and prefers to control who gets there first.